The time is November 1997, where Hollywood took on an adaptation of a book by Robert Heinlein that is just as smart in its own way as a bug-blasting, politically driven spectacle that's way smarter than it first appears. Set in the future where citizenship must be earned through military service, this film follows Johnny Rico and his fellow recruits as they battle a relentless alien species known as the Arachnids. But beneath the 90210 over-the-top drama, sci-fi action, and over-the-top propaganda lies a blockbuster satire about fascism, media manipulation, and the cost of blind patriotism. Is it just a popcorn sci-fi film or one of the most misunderstood political commentaries of the 90s? This movie is proof that we can still have political commentary and satire in film, and no matter what your political opinion is, we can have a middle ground and engagement of entertainment, along with some messaging in film. This week on Back to the Balcony, we dive into 1997's Starship Troopers.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
All right, so I gotta tell you, as a teen, loved it. Loved every minute of it. And as an adult during the rewatch, I think the last time I saw this movie was about 5-6 years ago, give or take. And I didn't catch a lot of the things I was looking for now that I have an eye for it. And this one really does do something different for me, where we do have a lot more going for it than just the pure spectacle. I mean, I didn't even realize at my rewatch that it takes over an hour for us to get into some spectacle moments, some box office moments, some special effects of just bug blasting. It takes an hour of build to really get us to get there. And there's a new level of appreciation I have for how this movie builds. But with that said, there comes a level of disappointment that with our filmmaker and our director, there isn't as much satire as I remember. The RoboCop satire that really teases throughout this movie that I wanted more of as an adult, but not so much as a teen. So I'm back and forth, but at the end of the day, I still love it.
Yeah, this is a forever Antonio movie. I saw it in the theater. I think I was like 16 when it came out, and I did not see it in the main release. I saw it in the Dollar Theater roughly around the time Half Baked came out. I think Half Baked came out in like either late December or mid-January of the following year. And I saw them both on the same day. And I will always remember that double feature. Sometimes I screen it just because I loved it so much. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you don't understand the satire, and if you don't understand the political commentary that Paul Verhoeven and Edward Neumeier, the screenwriter who also did RoboCop, are trying to give you, it does feel like a nihilistic, cruel, almost propagandish film of like, you got to be in the military to be a citizen and to vote and all that kind of nonsense that we hear piped through the modern day propaganda channel. But that's the thing, is like, as you start learning more about history, as you start learning more about how propaganda works, the satire of Edward Neumeier and Paul Verhoeven, and also realizing that Robert Heinlein's novel was almost kind of pro-propaganda, and this movie is a satirical take on it. It's almost spitting in the face of the source material. That pissed a lot of science fiction purists off. So you had this weird kind of dichotomy where you had like the science fiction purists who are like, the novel is the novel, and they believed in all this weird bullshit that was kind of pushed through that narrative. And then you had the people that got it. The people that understood what they were doing with RoboCop, the people that understood that Paul Verhoeven is really just a real shit-eating grin filmmaker who's like, I'm going to trick you into learning something about how the world works, and it's all bullshit. I love this guy for that. I've always liked Paul Verhoeven for that. He does it with Basic Instinct. He does it with Showgirls. It's a real kind of emotions on your sleeve kind of filmmaker where he really is showing you more than he's telling you. And if you know how to watch his movies and if you know how to watch his style, you appreciate it. Hollow Man as well, right? Hollow Man is an exploitative B movie, but you watch it in today's lens and it makes so much sense on a cultural level when it comes to ego and toxic masculinity and runaway technology. Like, the guy was playing with some serious cards in his deck that no one really recognized back then. But I think Starship Troopers is like the perfect example of it. The satirical commercials, the military advertisements. I mean, I can't get over how good he and Newmeyer do that. But then also really pushing the boundaries of CG technology in 1997. These special effects still hold up. The campiness of, let's say, 50s war movies in the performances and the character arcs still holds up. This movie just is a very special piece of cinema, and I'm so glad that you brought it to the table.
This was going to come because I know with Roger being a sci-fi kind of guy, this one, in the back of my mind, I said, he must have loved this. I knew I saw this review, but we'll get into that. But here's kind of where I agree with you is it takes material from Heinlein that really did go in one direction with commentary. And we take this material and we can tell that it's very careful to an extent on how far it's going to take the satire. And I really think that is the flaw of the movie is it doesn't go far enough. It really doesn't take the material and give its own stamp on what it actually means in contrast to the novel. I read the novel years ago and it is black and white when it comes to the movie versus the novel. But here's what I do respect about what our filmmakers do is the pacing between the novel and the movie is spot on. We don't go full on bug war. We have build in both pieces of material that we have to get to know the characters. And this is where I think if I were to put on my critiquing hat between comparison of the two, is I think the novel, of course, is going to do it better, even though the commentary is dragging compared to the movie. So I think what the movie does is give us characters we actually like. We actually want to follow. It's over dramatized. And I think that matches the satire to a full 110% match where we have overcompensating characters. We have over dramatized situations to an extent of emotion. We have that prom scene. We have the relationships that on the surface level feel really deep to push these characters into a war situation. But we don't get that emotional waste where we don't have to spend time getting to know these characters on an emotional level. Because when we get into the military situation, you don't have time to be emotional. You are training, you are exercising your mind to be that masculine man to go into battle. So I think all that is done well. And that's what makes the teenagers really follow these characters, even though they're probably 30, 40 years old at this point. But the relatability at this point, I think, is there by the setting. We teenagers, when I saw this movie, I followed along with the prom. I followed along with the relationships, the jealousy, whatever it may be. That, yeah, we follow along. And that's what the first hour and 15 minutes is dragging us along with these relatability situations to lead to what will I do for love? What will I do for the girl? What will I do? Not necessarily for the country or citizenship. That's a last resort. That's on the almost the back end of Rico's mind. He wants the girl. So I think that is the main driver of why teenagers really were attracted to this movie. It's not the political shit. It's I want to be the one that gets the girl. I want to prove myself. Those are the two big aspects of the driver of this movie that's more entertaining, almost just as much as entertaining as our bug war.
Right. Like, the movie plays on so many different levels that it's been discussed many, many times in the past. Let's say that since the advent of podcasting, there's been dudes just like us talking about Starship Troopers and the depth of it and what it means, that we're not covering any new ground. But for our listeners, this is where I think the ground does get covered. The Heinlein and the book are extremely nihilistic. There's no fun. It's dark, it's gloomy, it's about death and destruction and the terror of humanity and war. But what Verhoeven and Neumeier do is like they turn everyone into almost like a 1950s caricature. Like Casper Van Dien is that, soldier boy Johnny Rico, right? The picture of a war movie from the 50s, or one of those join the army posters with a handsome young white dude on it, right? That's him. That's him embodied. And then like the Jake Busey character, I mean, he may as well be Lampwick from Pinocchio, right? He is that kind of like weird, goofy dude. He plays the fiddle. He thinks he's tough shit until he's not, right? Then you've got the stereotypical army dudes, Clancy Brown, Michael Ironside, Uncle Hank from Breaking Bad, right? Like everyone in there is playing exactly the caricature that you would expect in a 50s B war movie that's been sewn together with the 50B sci-fi flick, but made incredibly gory, violent, and satirical. Like the levels that it plays on and the inspirations, I think, is what really gets people talking now, because we didn't have the kind of research that we did back then. We didn't have YouTube, we didn't have streaming, we didn't have access to all the source materials this movie's based on. In a sense, it's like Pulp Fiction. It has so many archetypes from classic literature, genre B movies and stuff like that are so recognizable now, but back then it seemed almost too progressive. People didn't know enough of what it was. So I feel this movie has aged better than a lot of other films from this era. Now, critically, critics didn't get it. A lot of critics hated this movie. And even though it wasn't a money loser, it barely made its budget back. So for an R-rated, kind of goofy movie that was really banking on the teenage boy audience, very much like we talked about in Event Horizon, that's what its audience was. But now I feel like it's almost become like a sophisticated film to watch because of the layers and the depth. And we are just fortunate that the execution is well too. Because if the execution of filmmaking and special effects wasn't there, then no one would give a shit. And I think that's the real differentiator here, is that this movie actually is well made. I got one more piece that I want to talk about later, so you go ahead.
Well, I just want to give kind of credit, because I think the filmmakers misstep on the rated R rating, because there are scenes here that could have pushed it to PG-13 easily, and it wouldn't have lost any magnitude of how the movie did. I think it would have done better. And I think what really does make this movie... Now, I don't want to insult any of the supporting cast here, because I think they all do a decent job, but I don't think Casper Van Dien gets enough credit on this movie, because he gets the assignment here. He knows exactly kind of what you just spoke to. This is like a 50s type of manly man role. He wants to prove himself, and he does a fantastic job on just the straight-faced, the military guy that wants to go into battle. And the co-stars, even some of our veteran actors, follow his lead to an extent. But we do get his co-stars that are just kind of the stereotypical teenagers. So I think one of the missteps of this movie is not everybody being on the same page as our Rico character, where it could have looked like a 50s almost sci-fi soap opera where it's overacted, it's overemphasized, and that is the best part of the movie. Is anytime Rico comes onto the screen, we follow him, versus every other character, we follow the situational pieces of what they do in the moment. So I think when it comes to performances, it's a shame that we didn't get a bigger career out of this man, because I think he understood the assignment here, and I think it would have been wise for him to challenge his range down the road. We see a lot of people involved in Starship Troopers that have banked on the success of Starship Troopers, that just followed the same projects, the same sequels. And I think that is a shame, because I would have loved to see the talent that really did drive this movie to make it memorable, see what they can do in the future.
No, I've always liked Casper Van Dien. Again, like I feel the dude was just miscast, then typecast, and then just never really got out of that B movie, TV movie genre. That's just where he got stuck. But I tell you, man, you hit the nail right on the head, not just with, let's say, the casting director of this film, but the kind of picture that Verhoeven paints. Like, he is very surgical with how he is having these actors perform in this movie. Denise Richards is not known for being an amazing actress, right? And it shows here. There is a level of, I'm going to say, misunderstanding of the character that I feel is intentional from the director, where she's gorgeous, but us watching this movie from back in 1997 till now can never understand how Johnny Rico is so attached to the idea of her when Dizzy fucking rocks. Like, she is one of the most underrated female leads, misunderstood girl crushes of cinema history. I think Angela Bassett in Strange Days is another one where it's like, he does not deserve this woman. He does not deserve her love and attention. This is the other one. Like, Rico does not deserve her at all because he's pining after the dummy. But guess what? That is so in tune with what a young man thinks. We choose the wrong people to attach ourselves to so often in our teens, and then we realize it later. And we get to live that in this movie. As a 44-year-old dude watching this, I'm like, dude, how is he so hooked on Carmen? She does nothing for him, but it's just the idea of Carmen and the idea that everyone else wants Carmen. And it speaks to the other part, too, the class warfare of this movie, where Neil Patrick Harris and Denise Richards, right, they come from well-to-do families. They're very intelligent, so they get pushed up the ranks into higher parts of the military. He's a dumb middle-class football player who can't pass a test, so he ends up in infantry. Okay, that is literally the story of like the American army and how its recruitment works since the dawn of this country, right? But it plays it satirically. Again, it's working on so many other levels, and it puts us in that character's footsteps, where we are in the grunt. We're in the roughnecks throughout the movie. And the class warfare that Verhoeven paints with how pretentious the scientists are, how pretentious the pilots are, right? It's all intentional, and it's fucking genius.
I agree with you, is when we take Denise Richards, and during yesterday's rewatch, and I've watched it twice this week.
I've watched it twice too.
It's one of those where there's a moment where she is saving the ship from the asteroid, and she has a singular moment where she doesn't even deliver a line. She just whips back to the captain after the captain delivers a line saying, it's not luck, it's a great pilot ship or whatever it may be. And she just turns to the camera and smiles. I'm like, that is why she was casted in this movie, because I don't remember anything else of this movie other than that moment with her. Is we have all these good looking characters. We have this great looking cast. Again, the 90210 aspect of it. But we spend so much time with Dizzy to really understand her, to understand why the chemistry is there. But we don't get enough with the other characters to really make them matter. Neil Patrick Harris, he's the most successful out of the entire cast, and he has minimal lines. And even at this point in his career, he's probably the most well-known character to an extent other than Denise Richards.
Right, he was like a treat to have in the movie.
Yeah, he's the one that is just the happy character that you just know, I'm comfortable with this character, this actor, this talent. So I think a lot of the characters, there's not a lot of depth. You take the most talented pieces of it, and they don't do anything with it. But Dizzy is the one that has to prove themselves. It's almost a brilliant strategy to a box office gamble. So I appreciate it to an extent, but at the same time, I think that's where the movie really lacks, is really an emotional depth to what's happening outside of the Rico clan. Because when we take a military operation, obviously in a movie especially, there's going to be multiple aspects and multiple importance to how the stakes are going to be, but we don't feel the stakes outside of the Rico clan. And I think that's where the movie does drag a little bit, is not spending that much time. But this is going to be a but for me, a but review for Justin but Rico is so interesting that it's hard not to focus on him because he is the main character. He is the best performance of the movie that gets the assignment. So I think this is where the filmmakers really, again, need to pivot to really find a proper balance. But holistically, by the time the credits rolled, it all kind of holistically works.
I got one more thing to say about the filmmaking before we jump into the critiques. Verhoeven, to me, is such a master of making a movie feel like a movie. This is a guy that gives zero shits about realism. He wants you to have fun. And there's something about the Verhoeven aesthetic that you know you're watching a movie because the suspension of disbelief is amplified. I'll take you back to Total Recall, right? Like amazing special effects, but also not. You know, the henchmen on Mars, the stormtroopers, so to speak. Most people kind of know by now, like when you look at their costumes, they have Casio calculators kind of duct taped to their wrists. It's almost like we want you to see how shoddy our production is because we want you to remember that you're watching a science fiction movie made by a guy who was fascinated by the obvious details of it not being real. Like an old Star Trek episode where you see repurposed props through episode after episode. This movie feels the same way. While the CG is actually really amazing, I feel like the art design and set design and prop design are somewhat kind of lackluster, but I think that's intentional. Everything looks almost fabricated as if it came out of an action figure or model kit, right? Like it looks that way, and I feel it looks that way on purpose because he wants to remind you that this is fantasy, that this is a film production. He does that in almost all his movies. He breaks the realism just enough to remind you that you are watching a movie. And in my opinion, he does that so you don't get so invested into the idea that this movie is not realistic enough. He breaks the facade for you. He breaks the suspension of disbelief for you, and I think this is the apex of that for him, where the movie feels so big and vast and good, but at the same time, you know it's a movie set. You know that it's fiberglass and not metal. And I just love that about his filmmaking is he breaks the realism for you and breaks that suspension of disbelief so you don't get overly invested and super critical about what the movie's not doing right.
I love it when any sci-fi movie goes that route. From Star Wars or any sci-fi movie of the 80s, you have to have some vulnerability. And
Yes.
if everything was absolutely perfect on the technology side, there would be no stakes. And we have, as humans, we are deeply flawed. And without the flawed characteristics of humans, we have no stakes. So yes, we can travel through space. Yes, we can miscalculate and run into a comet in the middle of space. Sure, there are multiple aspects of this, even building a fort on a different planet. It's not going to be the best because it's on a different freaking planet. So
Mhm.
I love that we have these little details in this movie to show how flawed we are compared to another race. And I think there's a bigger message here, obviously, because we are on a different planet. We have insects and we have just still, we're not shooting lasers. We're not shooting this technically advanced weaponry. And again, our critics will get into it. There are simpler solutions here, but we have to show how flawed we are, that we are not a superior race. We're not a superior being. We have to have the flaws just like our insects do to be on a level playing grounds. Obviously, there is a lot to sci-fi to tell not just what a blockbuster movie of entertainment can do, but to tell a deeper message. And when you go beyond the special effects, and that's what I hate about current sci-fi movies, is you have to have everything spit shine. You have to have
Mhm.
everything looking good. And that's not what sci-fi is. It is a movie of flaws of humanity, flaws of technology, flaws of even filmmaking messaging. So, and this one doesn't get tempted on that. And I appreciated that about this movie, that it doesn't get tempted, even with CGI skyrocketing towards the end of the late 90s.
All right, so let's listen to what our critics have to say about this. Gene brought this one to the show.
Giant bugs threaten Earth in Starship Troopers, a sometimes spectacular science fiction film that is directed by Paul Verhoeven, pokes fun at the gung-ho killing is fun mentality of old war movies. The movie makes the case that man is the most dangerous creature on Earth or off. Thrilling to be violent. Starship Troopers, based on Robert A. Heinlein's novel, is a dazzling-looking film, to be sure. The satire, I think, is broad, and I was bored only by some of the banal byplay between the young cast members. The result, a pretty good popcorn-eating picture, repetitive, but fun.
Okay, so he understood exactly what this movie was doing, and that's weird, because normally he's the one that looks at a film at face value and doesn't bother to look at the nuance of a movie, right? He did it with All That Jazz. He got the assignment on that one, and he got the assignment on this one, especially in his first few sentences, that this movie, and I'm not going to say the book, but the movie is definitely saying that these bugs have never messed with us had we not been trying to expand our species onto multiple planets and invade their habitat. That is why they're fighting. And then what do? We play victimhood when they decide to attack back and actually almost wipe us out. We miscalculated how powerful they are because, well, we're sentient and we're self-actualized and we are relying on technology. We're smart. These are biological, biomechanical creatures that don't have technology. Everything is based on nature. How are they kicking our ass? Well, in multitudes and numbers, in hive mind mentality. And that's one of the biggest parts of this movie that I think is so important, is the idea of individualism. And that's what the novel is about, is that the military is supposed to erase the idea of individualism so you become part of this fighting machine. But Rico's Roughnecks are essentially a differentiator from that, where the individualism is what makes them separate. So sometimes individualism is important. However, the bugs are just a hive mind. There's no individualism there. And with the brain bug at the end, it's essentially learning how humans are operating by being individualistic. That is what the part of the movie that I think a lot of people forget about, is that the bugs are learning how to fight like us. They're learning what we're doing, and they're using our own flaws against us by sucking our brains and reading our minds. It's a minor plot point that actually tells a lot about the story of like what Heinlein and what Neumeier and Verhoeven think about humanity. And that's where the movie totally misses a bunch of people. But Gene gets it right off the bat. And in his 35 seconds of this opening critique, he literally nails the point of the movie. And I feel like not only were people who were watching this not understanding or listening, but Roger doesn't listen either. What are your thoughts on this?
I think you absolutely nailed it, and I think Gene nailed it, and I don't think I've said that quite often on this show.
Not in 110 episodes, not really.
Not at all. But I think this goes to what relatability in film really is, because Gene, being part of the military reserves, I think he connected and enticed him to pay attention to not only the messaging, but the actions, the characters, what was actually happening. So I think this is where film really does go back, especially with critics, to almost an unfair level where everybody's going to react in a different level. So critique is absolutely pointless unless you're watching like The Master of Disguise or Biodome. This one is where the messaging in a movie really does point the finger saying, watch me, watch what I do, and go with me on the journey. And I think Gene held on to that, and it was a payoff. Because in the beginning, it was that hook that he did relate to, and then it turned into more of a popcorn flick that had a payoff for him. I think this one with critics didn't really relate because it is holistically unbalanced. I will 110 agree with that, is that the satire we don't get enough of. I see the flaws of it, but I don't really fucking care. But I think when it comes to how critics viewed it, you had to have a relatability hook. Either you were a teenager, you were part of the service, or if you just wanted a 2 hour and 15-minute shooting spree of just alien invasion, you probably didn't like it as much. So you need to have that relatability factor. And Gene not only related to it, he got what this movie was trying to do, like you just said. So I think that is probably one of the best intros for Gene when it comes to a blockbuster movie, especially in November, that he has done on this show so far as an intro.
Right. And I think there's something to be said about, where Paul Verhoeven, like I said, is a filmmaker who is comfortable with his own path of being let's say a trickster, a provider of cinematic fuckery. But in order for that to work, you have to be on the same wavelength as an audience member. So if you've seen RoboCop and you've seen Total Recall and you've seen Basic Instinct, you probably are in tune with what he's doing because you're used to it. If you are just someone who wants to see a sci-fi action yarn that maybe is more in tune with a James Cameron film like Aliens, then you're not going to be in tune with what the movie's doing. And that's, I think, the point that Roger's about to make, because he was not in tune with the movie.
Too repetitive for me, and I have to give a thumbs down. I enjoyed the satire at the beginning,
Yes,
but
I did
then
too.
at the end, and it's a movie that lasts more than 2 hours,
That's why I said
you
repetitive.
get a lot of shots of bugs being blown up. And these
Yes.
bugs, once you master what they look like and what they can do, are pretty boring because they don't have very many resources. They're not real interesting movie aliens like the character, for example, in the movie Alien. And you'd think that sooner or later the troopers would figure out that it's inefficient to try to kill them with machine gun bullets when all it takes is a grenade and you could blow them right up real good.
So here's my problem with that, is that the movie's not about the bugs. The movie is not about the bugs. The bugs are the MacGuffin of the movie to teach us more about what the hierarchy of society is, right? And at the end of the day, whether you believe it or know it or refuse to accept it, in our society, military is the number one source of revenue. All of our money goes to the military. We don't see tanks and jets in the sky all the time because all of our military is kept essentially outside of the country or on bases, and the recruitment come to the school, but you don't get indoctrinated or initiated into the military during peacetime. You know, it's something that seems unreal to us in this movie of how predatory the military is, but we did not live through like the Vietnam War. We did not live through the draft. Our generation didn't do that. We've heard stories and we've seen it in movies. It's not part of our life. And at this time, this audience would have been people our age, teenagers, when this movie came out. So that's the audience that just didn't get it back then. But give us a few years, get us through some college, get us some general social studies and history, then it makes sense because it's not about the bugs. The enemy is always invisible until you get there. The enemy is always misunderstood until you get there. The people in charge know what it is, but when you're the grunt on the ground, you don't know anything about it. You are cannon fodder to figure out the enemy's weaknesses. That's the whole point of the movie. And they're trying to lure these kids into the military because citizenship is the goal. Like, it is a transfer of not even power, it's a transfer of status. And the transfer is your life, essentially, which you can tell by the way the movie's made is worthless to the military. You are out there literally just to figure things out and slow things down while the people like Neil Patrick Harris's character study what's going on and can make moves and plans. That's the whole core concept of the movie. It's not about the battles. It's not about the action scenes. That is literally just part of the mechanism that keeps this engine going.
I am gonna dumb it down even
Yeah, please do.
more. Here's kind of the contradiction to Roger is he says there's too much bug killing. There's so much repetitiveness towards the end. They both agreed on that. I'm not going to argue that. But the repetitiveness is not from the bug killing because understand, we don't see bug killing till way past the last half of the movie. So it reminded me of when he reviewed Jurassic Park. And this is where a statement that stayed with me that has been proven wrong is none of the characters are memorable.
I agree with you.
So
Jeff Goldblum.
I can list walking out of that theater, even as a kid, every single character. And I wanted to learn the actors walking further out of the theater of who performed that. So it was encouragement. So the fact that he's not acknowledging what the hook was the point that he was entertained during the first hour and 15 minutes of the movie. He just didn't realize it. And to the point where he was actually engulfed in the story was during the kill scenes, was during the bug scenes. Yeah, to an extent, the point is, yeah, like I said earlier, a grenade technology advances could have killed these bugs, but that is the flaw of humanity of not realizing what's directly in front of you that can win a battle or could kill the enemy, whatever it may be. those are the flaws of humans that he's not looking on a deeper level. And this is Mr. Sci-Fi guy that, yeah, just because there's guns involved, a battle scene, doesn't mean you can't look deeper than that when it comes to a sci-fi film, because there's more than just a battle scene on the surface. If it takes an hour and 15 minutes to get us to that point, then you deserve it to the filmmakers to look beyond the point. So, because we have a whole hour of a battle scene, and to an extent, it feels repetitive. But if you actually look at what the movie is trying to prove, there's more to it.
Well, I also think that's why sci-fi gets a bad rap sometimes, because this story could have been played out as a World War II epic and not had aliens, and it would be prompted as a classic, as a modern classic. Or Braveheart with its endless fucking sword battles, which I think are boring as hell, yet it wins Best Picture. What's the difference? But because this is sci-fi, and because it's got a little bit of satire and poking the ribs of government propaganda, it doesn't get as much appreciation from critics. It gets appreciation from thinkers later down the road. It's a slow burn of a movie, and it's so much more appreciated now than it ever was back then, and like rightfully so. And it just blows my mind that Roger is one of the critics that just didn't get it back then. So they finish off the conversation.
I may have been intimidated by the sheer artistry. I'm talking about the technical computer artistry of them, because when I saw the masses of them running, I thought of Jurassic Park, frankly, and how exciting it was to see those creatures, which had more personality, to be sure. But the satire constantly throughout it, I enjoyed having exposed the kick of killing, and I thought that was what this director Verhoeven put into the story.
It just goes on and on and on.
It does go on,
and
it could have been cut by 20 minutes
easily.
So, I mean, I feel like Roger doesn't really solidify his point, other than he just didn't like the monotony of the battle scenes. And honestly, I don't know what he's talking about. Like, I think they're all exhilarating. I think they all use violence very cleverly, because it keeps the fight scene interesting to see people's arms and legs cut off, and to introduce an acid spitting bug or a fire farting beetle, right? Like, I love all of that shit. But again, I think Roger likes more esoteric Rod Serling type sci-fi. This whole kind of B-movie, grindhouse feeling, generic archetype, stereotype character feeling movies, it doesn't intrigue him intellectually. Therefore, he puts it off as kind of, I don't know, pedestrian. And I feel that he made a big mistake. Now, I don't know if he went back and reevaluated this movie later, but a lot of critics did. And they went back on their review of it. And a lot of people on Rotten Tomatoes are like, dude, I did not understand this movie when I was younger, and now I do. So this is a movie all about hindsight. But I love the fact that Gene got what it was doing right off the bat. He needed a win for me, and this was a win.
I think this one, when it came out, was surface level, a cinematic breakfast sugary cereal that it was marketed towards to bring audience members in. And this is one of those movies that set the expectation that this was going to be a summer blockbuster released in November, right before the holidays. And
right,
I think
it had to go up against Alien Resurrection.
Yeah, I think it was bad timing. And I think, due in part to the studio, I think this would have done extremely well during the summer. But at the same time, the marketing advertised that sugary cereal cinematic fluff that we are just going to get pure entertainment for over 2 hours. And I think Roger, you're right, doesn't solidify his point on it being something other than just repetitive. He again contradicts himself in his review to the point where he can only talk about the second half of the movie. If you get to the second half of the movie and you don't realize you're there, and that's the only thing you can talk about, the movie has done its job. It's entertained you. So I think Roger just doesn't get the point. And this one was a very disappointing review for me, because going in and looking at Roger's review, I said, with any sci-fi movie, I'm like, Roger's going to dig this. And again, I was taken by surprise that I was wrong. He did not dig this movie, just like a lot of sci-fi movies I've been taken back for, of how could he have not have seen this? This is a guy that really does dig deep into sci-fi, but if there's colorful pictures, if there's colorful characters, he can't get past that. He loves his sci-fi as thought-provoking, but you put something pretty on screen, it's hard for him to get past that, just like what we just said in Jurassic Park. He cannot get past the dinosaurs, for example. He says, once the dinosaurs are off screen, there's nothing interesting happening. Guess what? There's 12, 15 minutes of dinosaurs. What were we doing for the other minutes of the movie that the characters weren't interesting? So it's a lot of surface level criticism when it comes to the thought provoking of going past just colorful characters and colorful pictures.
Agreed. And that's the thing is like when you are a special effects heavy film of the 90s, you really cannot avoid being compared to Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, The Lost World, right? You can't escape being compared to those. And we will probably end up doing Alien Resurrection on the show eventually, but that's another one came out right in the same time, same month as this one did. And I think the thing that the late 90s bringing European auteurs to the science fiction scene, I think it really did something that upset a lot of people. And it took the grittiness and realism that the 80s and 90s with filmmakers like James Cameron and Ridley Scott, who really changed the face of sci-fi. I feel a lot of people thought that these European filmmakers were taking it back to its campy roots. The same way that Batman Forever took it back to its campy 60s roots and kind of ruined the dark, broody aesthetic that Tim Burton did. We were so critical about changing the genres back then. And now, if you look at sci-fi movies for the most part, they're goofy and they're fun and they're heavily satirical. I mean, Mickey 17, which came out last year, perfect example. It's a class war film and it's satirical as hell. And it really focuses on all the things that are going to eventually happen with us with cloning and bad technology and eliminating our resources. Yet we can have a laugh at it. That's what this was doing. The world just wasn't ready yet.
100%. And I think this is one of those that it's really hard for critics at a one-time viewing, a Friday, Saturday, Thursday screening, whatever it may be, to walk in, walk out and say, this is what this movie is at surface level. And, I think I love that you brought it up, that many critics came back to watch this movie. And there's not many critics that will go back and say, I was wrong about this. And there's an appreciation and almost an obligation to filmmakers to say, if you give a 1-star, 2-star review, you need to go back a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later and just reevaluate, especially a movie that involves messaging that is so apparent from a drama, sci-fi, war movie, even if that's the case, to go back and say, this is what I saw differently, because movies do mature as we mature. And
But I mean, in this case where I have to critique the critic here, I mean, Gene knocked it out of the park. He got the nuance, and he is so oblivious to nuance. So that is really impressive to me. I just love everything that he said. And like I said, this was a very short conversation. And I don't know if that's because Roger didn't have a whole lot to say other than the film was repetitive and it just dragged on. And Gene just kind of had to offer his retort. I think that's the biggest problem with this conversation is that Roger's not aggressive enough and Gene's not trying to draw aggression out of him. He said his piece, he knows that he's right in his opinion, and he just lets it rest. Therefore, it's shorter and less interesting. I think the film and the modern day discussion of what it means is more interesting than their conversation. But with all that being said, I love everything Gene said about this movie. I give him an A.
it's well deserved. My only thing is Gene, he should have fought harder with Roger and not agreed with him, because I think he had better points than Roger did, because Roger brought nothing to the table. It was just a contradiction, because I think looking at it now, again, I've said it probably 3 times so far in this episode, he contradicts himself, and there's nothing other than it being repetitive, but he's talking about the second half of the movie, and the first half is a lot of build with characters that we want to follow. And that's what should have been the primal focus of this review, is if you can go halfway through the movie and follow these characters, it's almost a 75% success that the movie is going to end up at least entertaining. So honestly, this is not a good Roger moment. I have to give him a 1 star on it, solid.
Yeah. And it's something that I've been thinking about lately, especially in the terms of debate. Maybe the reason why Gene didn't go so hard in the paint against Roger is because if you know that you are right and your opposition is incorrect, sometimes you just let the opposition dig their own hole, right? There was no need to argue or push back as much as he needed to because in his mind, he didn't really have anything else to say. The battle had already been won. So let the opposition bury themselves and just let it lie, because the more that you try to push the idea that you are correct in your opinion, you might stumble over your own opinion. And I think that's what he's preventing. So I'm kind of cool with him letting sleeping dogs lie on this one.
I am, but I'm not, because honestly, this is a movie that should have been pushed a little bit further, especially with a November release. I think the words that are painful for me with Gene is, "You're right." You're right. It shouldn't be landed in a critique saying, "I see everything." The only thing I would say for Gene is I agree with 110% of what you said, but this is where I would let sleeping dogs lie. Is, "You're right. I don't care. It's a fucking good time, and I loved it. Done."
And instead he took like the wife approach, right? It's like, "Yeah, honey, you're right. Even though you're wrong, you're right," is what it kind of turns into.
Should have patted Ebert's head on that one.
Right. Okay, so now that we are in like a little sci-fi corner now, Justin brought sci-fi to the table. I'm going to have to retort. I'm not saying I'm one-upping. I'm just retorting. I'm bringing, because I haven't watched it since cable in the mid to late 90s, Brett Leonard's Virtuosity, starring Russell Crowe and for some reason, Denzel Washington. Now, I knew this movie was goofy as shit when it came out. And I'm not saying it was a guilty pleasure. All I can say is that I watched it more than once back in the 90s. But I've also not watched it since. However, I have revisited Lawnmower Man a couple times, same filmmaker, and I'm curious to see if the reevaluation of Lawnmower Man, which I have done recently and actually enjoyed more now than I did back then, does that same idea transfer to his other film, Virtuosity? I guess we'll have to find out.
I've already watched it, and I'll leave it at that. But at the same time, it enticed me to watch another kind of outlandish Keanu Reeves movie from the 90s that I'm sure I'm going to land on the list of discussions here soon.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I own 3 versions of that movie, so we'll get there eventually. That should be a fun one because I fight for that movie. But anyways, we'll leave that for another day. Anyway, everyone, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, rate, review, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And please like, rate, review, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Leave comments, leave film suggestions if it's a movie that was covered on the Siskel and Ebert or At the Movies show that we can find on YouTube. If we haven't done it yet, we'll put it on the list. And you can find me, Antonio, over at the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast on thecultworthy.com. You can find my co-host Justin Henson over at
The Movie Wire Podcast at themoviewire.com.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.